You're listening to Screenwriters Need to Hear This with Michael Jamin. Hey everyone, Michael Jamin, and I'm here with Phil Henry Hudson, and we're talking about, he's going to have a different title every time we talk. Today we're talking about changing the emotional story. Hey Phil.
Hey, what's up? And by the way, I'm related to Henry Hudson's brother, not Henry Hudson.
Oh, is your brother named Henry?
No, his Henry Hudson, the founder of the Hudson Bay and the Hudson River.
Yeah.
His brother. That's my genealogy. Not Henry Hudson, but the brother.
Oh, is that right? So you're actually related to that guy.
I am
Does everyone
18 removed.
I bet you every Hudson says they're related to that guy.
Well, yeah, I can prove it with my genealogy, though.
All right.
But I'm not related to the guy. I'm just his brother.
His brother. All right. Excellent. All right, so everyone, that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about Phil's last name, and we're going to talk about changing the emotional story, which I kind of think is interesting.
Let's dive into the etymology of the name Hudson. So in no, I'm just kidding. Let's dive into the real stuff.
Let's dive into the real stuff. So, when you write a story, Phil, you always have to write, you talk about what's it about, then you talk about this. I go into real depth into my course.
Yeah, this is a very important note, by the way, for everyone listening. I'll just say this was something I didn't quite grasp until your course, was the difference between what you're about to talk about.
So we'll just touch on it lightly. But if you really want to go into a deep dive, then you sign up for my writing course. But this is my screenwriting course. So, when you write a story, this is any story. It could be for film, TV, a short story, a novel, a play, whatever. You want to talk about what it's about, and then when you want to talk about what it's really about, the deep down. And so, what it's about is like the plot. And so and then what it's really about is like the themes or the emotions you're going to explore. And when I was a writer on Wilfred, many of you saw that as an FX show, and it was a really hard show to write for. It was about, you wouldn't think of it, because it was about a dog who smoked pot. But we were not sure if this magic talking dog was actually a magic talking dog or the product of the lead character's neurosis. Was he imagining this dog, or played by Elijah Wood? Was it him? We don't really know whether Wilfred is a real talking dog or his Elijah Wood psychosis talking. So every line of dialogue had to do both, had to serve as both, and it was almost impossible to write. It was a hard show to write for. But anyway, so we would write these episodes, and the showrunner and co-creator of this, David Zuckerman, he wanted to have every show to be about a theme, wanted to be about a word. And so sometimes, and he'd always choose a word. So sometimes it would be okay, this episode we're talking about deceit. The word is deceit. And then we'd break the story and tell the story, making it all about deceit. And then a couple days later, he'd come back into the room and he goes, no, deceit is not the right word. Betrayal. And you'd be like, but isn't betrayal the same word as deceit? No, it's not. Because betrayal implies you're telling somebody what something is, and then you're kind of going back on them, and you're tricking them. Deceit is just whatever. You're coming out, you're not being forthright. But betrayal is a more intimate breach of trust. And you're like, oh God. And then you had to re-break the story based on this word, betrayal, as opposed to deceit. And I'm making up words. We probably didn't use either one of these words. I can't remember the words we used. It was a long time ago. But it was that kind of writing. That's kind of what we did. You'd focus on the word first, and then you'd kind of go back and you'd re-break the story depending on what word you're doing. And that's just how that's how he wanted to run the show. But it's kind of an important lesson, I think, in terms of writing, is that, and the plot would be similar. It would be, but different enough. It'd be similar, but we kind of make tweaks, but noticeable tweaks. And so when you're doing any kind of writing, you'll have a plot, but then you want to say to yourself, okay, what is it? But what is it really about? What, on a deeper level, what's that word I'm going for? What's the word? And I do this all the time in my writing now. Even my personal, I'm writing a collection of personal essays. I do it all the time, where I pick a word. And I kind of learned this from writing on Wilfred. Is you pick a word, and that word can change the emotional story completely. And the plot can be very similar, but it leaves people with a different taste. And so you need to know what that word is. And you have to, and it's a very profound it's what separates good writing, from okay writing from good writing, I think.
Yeah. So on that note of this word, what's fascinating is Christopher Nolan does this with his movies. I know he did it specifically with the Batman trilogy that he did. The first film is about fear, the second is about chaos, and the third is about pain. And it's the overarching theme of the whole thing, down to the bad guys, the villains that Batman's fighting. They're all making him face that aspect of his life: his fear, the chaos that he doesn't want, and pain.
That's it. That's interesting. Like I didn't know that about Christopher. I know he's a great writer, so I'm not surprised that he does that. I just didn't know that he kind of publicly talks about it.
And he writes with his brother Jonah, and he writes with David S. Goyer as well, both incredible writers in their own right. And so I don't know which one's coming from, but I know those are the themes of those films.
Right.
And I mentioned at the top of the podcast, like why do I think that that this is one of those fundamental things? But I think this is the key thing. When I was first taking screenwriting stuff online, I was reading every forum, reading every website. I was paying for online courses from people who weren't actually writers. I was doing all of that stuff and investing thousands of dollars in that kind of stuff. And this is something that was touched on, but it never really explained very well, which is the subject of themes. Like, oh, you have to have a theme, but no one could ever tell me what that was. And your online course taught me this. It clarified, made it so clear, and this is something I live my life by. How can I be so clear, not so clear that they just understand, but so clear that they cannot misunderstand? Mm-hmm. And your course does a really good job. You just said it, right? Like, what it's about is plot. So this is the thing that is happening. These are the things people are doing. But what it's really about is the theme. And that is what's carrying us through. One note that I got that I feel was very helpful when pitching something is to start with the theme. What is the one word emotion that you're starting with? And so, in one of my advanced producing classes in film school, I had to pitch a couple writers who were professional writers. And I went in and I started that way. I said, this story is about belonging. And it follows, and then I gave my log line, and then I went in, and she raved about it to the whole class. And the only difference, I think, between what I did and everyone else was that one-word theme at the beginning, because it helps us understand why all these things happening tie together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's super important. I'm glad. Yeah, we go into more detail in the writing course, but it's super important. I'm glad you had that takeaway.
Super important, super important. So anyone listening, just write that down, right? Plot is what it's about. Theme is what it's really about.
When my partner and I will write an episode of TV, and then we figure out, as we're writing, we kind of figure out, or we usually figure it out when we're breaking the story, what it's really about. And we find ourselves when we're writing this episode, there's usually one word that comes up more and more off. Like it's almost like a drinking game. Like in college, you drink. Every time you see a car with the drink. And so it's like whenever we have that word pop up in our script, drink, and then we go back and try to change the word so it's not so obvious. But because it's just a natural way of writing, because every time you touch on this word, you're supposed to keep mentioning it because that's what the episode's about. So you want to disguise it a little bit, but you're supposed to keep saying it, and that's why we always laugh. I get that's the drink. What's the word of today? What are we drinking to today? Whether it's fear, anger, anxiety, whatever the hell it is, whatever we're exploring for that episode.
So how would you hide it? What's the practical application of that? You said, what's the difference between being deceived and being betrayed? Well, I imagine you're not going to just use another synonym for that word. How are you disguising it?
Yeah, obviously sometimes you just click on your thesaurus and find a different word. But also sometimes you're just like you're saying, if you're showing instead of telling,
subtext.
You deal with subtext, yeah. So you would kind of show a scene where someone being betrayed as opposed to being deceived or whatever.
Got it.
But it's interesting that there really is quite a bit of flexibility. I wrote, and I talk about this a lot. I'm hyping this up. My collection of personal essays that I'm putting out, and so each story has to be about something. And so I basically take these stories from my life. And I'm not that interesting of a person. I'm just I'm not famous, so no one really gives a crap what I did. So when I tell my stories, it's really about the story happened to me, but it's really your story as well. It's it should be relatable and I should be kind of telling your story more than me. The details are mine, but the story is yours. So I wrote this one story about this girl that like briefly dated in college, and it was really basically how I kind of met her. You know, in college you experience you find out who you are. And in high school I used to wear sneakers all the time, and in college I saw some kids wearing shoes, and I was like, wait a minute, maybe I should be wearing shoes. So I started wearing shoes every day, and it kind of changed.
And that's why he wears shoes to this day.
That's why, yeah, as opposed to flip flop. But so I wrote the story about it, called the Marissa Disclaimer, and the original story was about one thing, and then as I read it, I changed the word, I changed the theme, and I wrote a whole different story. The events are all the same. It's about me wearing shoes for the first time and kind of meeting this girl and dating her briefly. So the events are all the same, but I changed. I wrote the first draft. I was not happy with it, so I changed the word, whatever emotional word I was going for the story, and I changed one word, and then I rewrote the whole thing, and I got a much deeper, more profound story out of it simply by changing that one word, because that's what I was exploring in that story, you know.
Yeah.
So like the first one, it was more about, I can't remember the first version. It was more about me worried about being judged by people, and the second version, it was really more about me not being able to being intolerant. So the first version was like that's what it was. The first version of the story was, how am I going to be judged? I'm wearing shoes for the first time. Is this me? Am I trying to reinvent myself as the guy who wears shoes as opposed to the guy who wears sneakers for the first 18 years of his life? And then I kind of changed the word till about being intolerant, and how I was intolerant as a kid, and how I had to learn to become more tolerant. And that changed the entire story, but the plot is the same. Plot is the same, but the emotional story is different. And so I just think that's a lesson for anybody writing. First of all, I think most of you are not putting any kind of emotional story at all.
Right. And I think I would agree. I would think most young writers don't have that understanding, skill set, or vulnerability like we talked about in our last episode, right?
Yeah.
They're not aware enough with themselves to understand what they should be diving into. And what you're describing to me sounds an awful lot like what we would describe as journaling in today's vernacular, right? You are just exploring your life, but instead of just saying, today is a diary where I put, today I did these things and I had enchiladas. Like a journal is really like, it's a journey. You're going through the journey of your life, and you're leaving behind these things. This is something that has happened to me. Let me dive in and explore that. And diving back into our last episode 20, it's the emotional story. It's good writing versus bad writing.
The difference is, and I don't know if we talked about this at all, and I encourage people to write a journal or a diary or whatever it is, but your writing when you write a journal, you're really writing for yourself. You're, whatever, get your thoughts out, good, get it out. But when you're writing a story, you're not writing it for yourself. You have to keep your audience in mind, or else you're just being selfish. You're saying, I want to get this out of my head. And so I'm always thinking about, when I'm writing a story, like, okay, how is this entertaining to the reader or the viewer? Like, I feel that strong obligation that you are giving me your time. I better give you something in exchange, which is, I'm giving you what you want, not what I want, what you want. To give you something, there's a difference, because I think journaling, whatever, but it's very egocentric. It's good for you, but it's all about me. Here are my words. But when you're writing something for somebody else to read, you better give them what they want, not what you want.
It's really interesting, because when I journal thinking about who will read this, my children,
really?
My grandchildren. And it's really like, and I think it's because I come from a dysfunctional family where it's like, I never knew my grandfather on my dad's
But then you're
side.
censoring yourself, dude. Then you're saying,
but I'm not. I'm doing it with the perspective of, I wish I had something to look back on to say, I'm not the first person to deal with this mess. How did I resolve this mess so that my future children and grandchildren are able to come back and say, how did Grandpa Phil, how did Henry Hudson's brother deal with this?
As long as you're being honest and you're not worried
and it's
about
hard.
how to be judged, if you're going to be judged.
It is hard to do, but it's openly like saying, if you're living your life from a life of sincerity and truthfulness, it's not it's not the end of the world to document in paper all of the flaws and mistakes you're making. Now, is there some type of ego censoring happening still that I'm unaware of? Sure, that might be happening. I can't speak to that. But what I can say is I do approach it from that perspective. This
Right.
isn't about me. I'm just saying that might be another exercise to attempt to do the next time your listeners are journaling is, could you tell this story? How would you tell this story to someone else? Right?
Yeah. How would you
What's the lesson you learned? Why was this important?
Hi guys, it's Michael Jamin. I wanted to take a break from talking and talk just a little bit more. I think a lot of you people are getting bad advice on the internet. Many of you want to break into the industry as writers or directors or actors, and some of you are paying for this advice on the internet. It's just bad. And as a working TV writer and showrunner, this burns my butt. So my goal is to flush a lot of this bad stuff out of your head and replace it with stuff that's actually going to help you. So I post daily tips on social media. Go follow me at Michael Jamin Writer. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook and TikTok. And let's be honest, if you don't have time, like just 2 minutes a day towards improving your craft, it's not going to happen. So go make it happen for you at Michael Jamin Writer. Okay, now back to my previous rant. If you're going to focus on a different emotion, how would you tell that story now? If you're focusing on, okay, I'll give you another example. One of the stories I wrote, I talked about this briefly in this last podcast we did, was revisiting an old college girlfriend of mine. And if you were to tell this story, if you could have easily wrote about, oh, maybe I'm going to fall in love with her. Maybe I'm going to have an affair. I'm going to cheat on my wife and fall in love. Like that's an obvious place to go, right? If that's obvious, but that's not what happened. But so that's not the emotion I was going to explore in that story. I wasn't going to explore the emotion of of rekindling love or whatever, or jealousy or lust or whatever it is. I wasn't going to explore that. I was going to explore just the idea of memory. And so that was the word that I used over and over again, was memory. How did she remember me? How did I remember her? How were our memories? How did they change over the years? So that's the emotional word that I chose. But had I chosen a different word like lust or whatever,
different story.
Yeah, right. But the same details would have happened. I went to her house. I sat on the couch. I got these letters or whatever. The plot would have been the same, but we're examining a different emotion. You understand? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. This is what separates in my mind the films and stories that stick with us versus the ones that are like, oh, that was fun. Like people can knock on comic book films and superhero films, but there's a reason why grown men are sobbing in Iron Man. Right? Or not in Iron Man, but in Avengers Endgame. And it's because you have such a deep connection to these characters and the struggles they've been through and the growth they've seen and their path that it hits you, right? Because you're dealing with your own mortality and your own thing. So it's rooted in that. And I think it's what carries the weight that we all want.
People leave that out when young writers when they tell me about their stories. They're whatever, they'll pitch out this scenes and it's about this and that, and then there's a car crash and then an explosion. I'm like, boring. Plot. Who cares? Boring. What is it about? What's it about, dude? And I don't know. Well, you better figure that out because the plot is boring.
So do you have any practical advice to young writers about how to figure it out?
When I was in my 20s, I took a writing course from this guy, and he was like, you need to get yourself into psychoanalysis. And that's how old he was. He called it psychoanalysis. and I thought...
This is Bill Idelson?
Bill Idelson, yeah. And I was like, what are you talking about? I'm not crazy. I don't need the help, psychiatric help. Or that's how I was thinking. And he was right, and I was wrong. The point is, if you don't understand... It took me years to figure this out. But if you don't understand yourself, and most people in their 20s don't... I think very few people do. I think my daughter does. At least one of my daughters does, because she talks a lot about it. Maybe they both do. But if you don't understand yourself, how can you possibly pretend to understand the emotions of another character? Like you don't even understand yourself. How can you understand somebody else? And so that's what you gain from being in therapy if you can afford it. Or I know there was places that are on a sliding scale if you can't afford it. But to understand yourself is it's so crucial for a writer. You have to understand your own weaknesses and your own emotions. If you don't, you're not going to be able to write for somebody else.
Yeah. And a couple of examples come to mind here. There are a lot of people who kind of knock on Superman, Man of Steel, which is like one of the newer versions of Superman with Henry Cavill. It's written by David S. Goyer, and I was listening to a podcast with him, and he describes like what it's about. There's what it's about, which is it's Superman becoming Superman and saving the day from. But what it's really about is David S. Goyer talks about how he was dating this woman, and she had a son, and then he and that woman were now going to have a kid together, and he was talking to his son, who is his adopted son, basically. He's like, well, does this mean you're not my dad anymore? And he's like, no, like I will always be your dad, but I'm also his dad. And it's different. You have two dads, but I will always be your father. And then you cut to the film, and it's literally Clark Kent having this conversation with Jonathan Kent, talking about his other dad from Krypton. And it's really about what it's like to be a father and the struggle of picking which father-son relationships. And it's this beautiful, adds this beautiful layer. And I think anyone who didn't enjoy that film, if you rewatch it thinking it through the lens of this is about father-son relationships, it's a completely different film. I went to a Writers Guild event, and I sat up front because I had that golden ticket we've talked about before, and I got to pitch my feature, and I pitched it to an agent, a literary agent in this panel. And at the end, they asked me my questions and went through. I sat down, and then they started hearing the next pitch. And when she was done, the literary agent stopped and said, to the gentleman who pitched first, I just wanted to ask, why did you write a feature with such strong female characters? Why did you pick that female character for the lead? And I had to, like, in front of this whole group of people, say, I just want to understand why my ex-girlfriend cheated on me, right? And it, like, the whole room was like, oh, like you could just hear the gut check in it. But that's what it was for me. I was just trying to come to terms with what is it like being cheated on, and why would someone do this? And I did it through the metaphor and through the tapestry of a border patrol agent on the border, right?
That's right. So that's writing truthful. That's writing from a place of truth and bringing yourself to the script, putting yourself in the script. So there's psychoanalysis, right? Psychotherapy, therapy. There's work though. There's meditation. There's a lot of free things that exist too. Right? That's something you're getting into like very heavily right now is meditation, right? Yeah, I meditate a lot. There's any kind of awareness that you can bring to your like mindfulness when you into what am I feeling now? What am I feeling now? And when you meditate, a lot of times it depends what kind of meditation you do, but sometimes very often. The goal of meditation is just basically to concentrate on one thing, usually your breath, so you kind of put other thoughts out of your head. And so, like, for example, I'll think, I literally just, I close my eyes and it's breathing in, breathing out. That's what I say to myself, breathing in. And then I feel how the breath feels in my chest, and then I feel how it leaving my chest. And that's all you focus on. Now, it's impossible to do that because thoughts pop into your head and emotions. And when they do, I'll say, that's a thought. That's an emotion. That's jealous. That's an emotion, and I acknowledge it, and then try to let it go, and go back to the breath. But if you acknowledge it, now it kind of trains you for in real life. Like now you're walking down the street, or where someone cuts you off in traffic. Oh, that's an emotion.
That's a pro tip in LA if you're doing any type of PA work that involves driving around Los Angeles in traffic. Like meditation will save you. 10 minutes of mindfulness practice every day will stop you from screaming at people in your car.
Yeah, it really does.
Because you're just, this is, there's the thinking mind and the unthinking mind, the conscious and unconscious. And, there's this old practice, don't think about what I'm going to say. Just try your hardest not to think about this.
No, you're thinking about it. Don't think of a pink elephant.
Don't imagine the pink elephant, right? Yeah. Don't imagine the pink elephant on a unicycle. Well, what are you thinking about? Because you can't control that. But what meditation and mindfulness does, it allows you to recognize it, that's not you thinking that thought. That's just your brain doing what it does. And what I like about what you're doing, you're saying you're identifying what it is. That's a thought, and that's an emotion. That emotion is this. It's like also saying, I'm angry versus I feel anger. Right? Because one is like, I am angry. This is who I am right now.
Right.
Versus, at this moment, I'm feeling anger.
Exactly.
Why? Right. You're separating yourself from the emotion.
Yeah. And then you can later put that in your work. You can, okay, when someone says this to me, I feel jealousy. I feel whatever.
What does jealousy feel like? And we talked about NLP, but that's something they talk about is you can increase or decrease any type of emotion you're feeling. And they've, Bandler, who was one of the co-founders of NLP, he has this practice when you're feeling an emotion, you can identify it's in your body somewhere. It's in your throat, your chest, your stomach. And if this is too woo-woo for whoever, just think about it next time you're feeling anger. Where am I feeling that in your body? And it's just a neurological response. And that emotion has a momentum to it. It's spinning forward or backward or side, left or right. And if you imagine spinning that up in the direction it's spinning, you're going to feel that in a much more intense feeling.
Right.
And if you spin it the other way, it slows down. And it's just this approach you can take to better understand those feelings. And I would encourage anyone, especially younger writers who are afraid to feel those things, to tap into them and understand that your fear of feeling negative emotion, anger, frustration, jealousy, hurt, that's coming from judgment of other people on you. You feel those things because you're a human. And you, as a writer, as you said in your last podcast episode, it's your job. It is your responsibility to understand those feelings so that you can convey them to other people.
Right, right. And if you go through life and you're oblivious to it, and a lot of people, like I said, a lot of people are, like, you get cut off in traffic and you just, whatever. Like, or if someone hurts your feelings, says something and you just whatever, and maybe you just like choose to ignore it, or you don't confront it, or you just pretend it didn't happen. Like, your job is to acknowledge it and to recognize it. Like, your job is to feel those things so that you can help others feel it, be aware of it. So like when you're meditating, you're aware of, okay, I'm aware of this thought or this feeling. Well, in real life, be aware of your own feelings as well so that you can use them, so that you can make money off of it.
Yeah, I had this professor, Nathan Hollis, awesome guy. He was my age, so we got along really well when I was in film school. And he taught my directing class. And he gave me a sheet of paper called active acting verbs. Mm-hmm. And it was like, I told him, it was like, there are two things that I've described this way. Your course is one of them. His is the other, which is, it's like getting handed, you're given a puzzle and you have to figure out how to put this thing together. And then someone shows you the top of the box. And you're like, that's what it's supposed to look like. Okay. Right. And active acting verbs was this huge thing for me as a director and even as an actor and a writer, because I'm looking at it and I can say, okay, instead of me giving you a line reading as a director and saying, do it like this, I can say anger, like be frustrated. You've been betrayed, to call back to that, right? Like, what is that one word emotion, going back to what we were talking about at the top of this? And that's what you do. And so what I'll do, when I get, when I'm doing self-tape auditions and I get my sides, I will literally go through and I will just put a one word next to each line or break it up to say, this is what I'm feeling as I'm reading this. Yeah. And that helps me do my self-tape audition where it's just me because of COVID in my office here. Yeah. But as a writer, when I'm doing a rewrite, it's another thing I'll do is I'll go through and say, okay, what does this character want? What is their obstacle? What's their goal? All characters have those. They're conflicting. But what is the emotion? And I'll go through even in those small pieces and I'll add what are those active acting verbs that are going to capture what that person's feeling.
Yeah, yeah. We should do a podcast on that especially for actors. We'll make a note for that because, some people taking the course ask, well, I'm an actor. Is it going to help me? And I'm like, yeah, I can't believe I've given, like to actor friends, I've given them access to the course. My daughter is an actor and other people because if you're an actor, understanding the writing process, like acting and writing, they're just two sides of the same coin. So, it really helps to understand writing. If you're an actor, understand the writing process because you want to give the writer what they want. That's how you get the role. You want to be true to what the story tells you to. You want your acting. When you come up with a character, you want your character to be true to what the story requires the character to do. And so, if you look at it from the lens of a writer, that's how you can give the writer what they want, rather.
And we talked a little bit offline about this too, but it's. When I get handed sides for an audition and the character has been, it's just some guest part who has a line, but there's no meat in there for it. It makes it incredibly more difficult for me as an actor to guess what you want as a writer and harder for me to book my role because I'm making a choice out of what I'm inferring from that, right? Not from what the writer is putting in the writing. And that's something I've seen. I've done enough auditions to know, like, okay, this is a really good piece of writing, and I can see very clearly what I'm supposed to do here. And inevitably, those tend to be the ones I get callbacks on. And I think it speaks to my inability as an actor that I'm not able to make a better decision without the writer inferring. But I don't think it's a coincidence that I'm saying, oh, I know what this writer wants, which is probably what the director wants, so let me just be what they want instead of me guessing.
Yeah, right. And if you approach it from the lens of because especially for a smaller part, the smaller part, you're always supposed to be the obstacle for what the hero wants. You're not whatever the lead. The lead gets the backstory, gets all the interesting stuff. You're just there as set dressing, or you are an obstacle. You're a tool getting in their way. So we don't really need to know all about your backstory. We just need to know how you are going to get in the way of the hero, because the hero is the interesting one. And so if you can read that scene from the point of view of the hero and go, okay, this is what the hero wants, and I'm supposed to get in the way of what the hero wants, then you have a better chance of getting that role.
That's a great note right there for any actors listening. That is gold, because that's something that's not really addressed. You're just like, oh, go be consumed by the muse and portray what you feel like. It's kind of ethereal, and it's not practical. It doesn't help.
It doesn't help. That's why I think we should do a podcast on this. I did a couple of either TikToks or Instagram videos.
You've had some really viral TikToks that have done this, and I think on Instagram they perform really well too. Like talking about for actors.
So if you're an actor or listening to this, go follow me on Instagram. I post, I post. That's where I get most of the ideas for the podcast. It's like, okay, I come up with an idea for an Instagram video or a TikTok video, and then that's only 2 or 3 minutes long, and then here we can really dive deep into it and explore it better. So go follow me there.
Just on a note there too, which we can talk a little bit more in that podcast for actors, but it reminded me of another experience I had in that acting class, Acting for Life, that I was doing with Jillian and your wife. Yeah. There was a role I was given, and I just did not connect to the role at all. And I was just kind of up there doing my thing. And Jill, in her way, she got very upset with me, trying to get me to draw out and perform better. And I just didn't get the role. And then afterwards, my friend Cam was attending with me, and he's a decent actor. And he's just like, your problem is you thought your role served zero purpose. You went in thinking that you were just playing some side part, when in truth, you are the reason the other role comes to terms and learns what they need to learn.
Yes,
you are a linchpin. You're a lever here to push the other character. And I was like, I have just wasted an hour of opportunity to grow because of that. But it was an invaluable lesson that I remember.
Yeah, now you learned it. It's okay. Yeah. Now you learned it. That's exactly right. You approach it from that point. So we'll do a podcast on that. Maybe it's just for actors or something.
That would be good. I think from your showrunner perspective, because the producer, you're involved in the casting of actors, right?
Yeah, and I'm always like, there's I'll save this for our talk, but I'll give you a teaser maybe. But like, there's a perception like when actors come in, and all the producers who are sitting there on the opposite side of the room, like we're all weary and we're kind of staring daggers and impress us. It's not really that. It's more like, oh, please be the one. It's please be the one so we can stop the hell of auditioning people. Please be the one who gets the part so that we can stop looking. And so that's the weariness. It's not like we hate you. It's like we just hate being here. We just be great so we can hire you. And so maybe we'll do a whole podcast on basically what that means from a showrunner's point of view. It's like, I want you to be great so I can stop this and go back to my job, which is writing.
I think it's very interesting feedback too for people who are interested in being a TV writer, with, I imagine, the ultimate goal of being a showrunner at some point. I mean, the number one question you get asked is, how do I sell my show? Assuming those people want to be the showrunner of that show. What is that job? And I think that ties directly into it. Plus, again, you also have this directing perspective as well from the directing you've done in animation and live action.
Yeah, We'll talk about that. All right, we'll dive into that.
But all of this ties back to the emotional story, right? And it really is, from the notes, the way it's written in the page for that character, to the theme. It influences every aspect of the production, even back down to the art department and everything they're doing. They're picking up those words. They're inferring the emotion that they're reading when they get that, and that's what they're building out of to help you get what you want.
My daughter was auditioning. She just did a couple parts for, student film at USC, and so she got the sides and she's reading them, and I was helping her with it, and I was just basically saying all the stuff here that I would say as a writer. It's like, oh, okay, so what does your character want, and why does she want it, and why is it so important to her? Like, what's the emotional what is she really? What's the really at stake here? And just using it with that language helped her kind of figure out what the character. How to play the character, and it's always about the emotion. It's not about anything else,
Yeah.
It's
great, cool. You got anything else you want to talk about here?
That's it. I think we explored it. If you go, people, leave us a nice review on Apple Podcasts and write down the emotion that you want Phil to explore this week.
I'll do that in my meditation. I feel anger.
And then, write down in the notes section, in the description, give us a review. Say, I really like this podcast. Screenwriters need to hear this. But I do wish Phil would explore jealousy a little more in his real life.
Yeah, because anyone who knows me knows I need more jealousy.
So go do that and help him out.
Awesome.
All right,
Thank you, Michael.
Yeah, thank you so much, guys. Okay.
All right, bye.
Bye.